turn shapes into particles with this extension called ParticleShapes. It is created especially for motion designers, made to add another level of detail to animations in a quick and efficient way. This is not your GPU-enhanced particle plugin for complex particle worlds. The extension literally takes shape layers and makes them behave like particles using expressions. Lots of shape layers with added expressions slow down After Effects. Once you created an animation, bake it. Convert all the expressions into 3D keyframe animations, which speeds up your RAM previews. And you can go even further and bake your animations into 2D layers, which allows you to import your particle animations into Lottie Creator, for example. That also means when you pass the project on, you don't have to worry about a plugin. It's all standard After Effects. Alright, let's get into the details. There's a lot to cover. The top field shows you the comp that is selected. Next to it is a refresh button. Then there's a max particles field. This is the amount of shape layers, respective particles, that is created. Once you click on one of the presets, you can decrease the amount of particles in the settings, but you can't go over the max number. You would have to increase the max number, then apply the preset again. Then there are 12 presets you can choose from. Choose the one that comes closest to what you want to do. For now, let's click on the first one. It's added to the selected comp, and a particles folder is created in the project window. And the comp that actually contains all the shape layers is added. In the timeline, you can see a guide layer and the particles comp. Let's open the essential properties in the comp. They mirror the settings here in the user interface. Let's play the preset. You can see the blue square, which shows the emitter moving along the screen, emitting particles. In general, you can use either the essential properties or the user interface of the extension to change values. They are synchronized every 3 seconds. Set keyframes for properties in the essential properties. Once you've set keyframes for a property, it is recognized by the UI as well, and another keyframe is added. The reset button here resets the preset to the default settings. Let's go through the settings. The emitter position, you can type in values here or change the position in the essential properties. Some properties in the presets have already keyframes added. So when that's the case, a new one is added automatically. Show emitter size switches the sign square on or off, basically hiding the guide layer. Guide layers are never rendered, so you won't see the square in your exported videos. Emitter size, X, Y, and Z, changes the size of the emitter. That's the space in which all particles are born. Emitter particles birth delay means the first particle is born at frame 0. The birth of the next particle is delayed by 0.07 seconds in this case, and so on. If you set this to 0, all particles are born at frame 0. Emitter particles distribution means there is a starting position for each particle within the emitter, and there is a behavior you assign with all the settings below that moves the particle way outside the emitter. And this setting determines the time the fate takes from birth position to the particle behavior. In this case, it is 2 seconds, and you can see that it takes the particles quite a while to move away from the original position. If I set this to 0, you can see the particles start their assigned behavior with frame 0. And that makes sense when the particle emitter is as big as your comp, for example. Number of particles is the number of shape layers that are visible out of the 100. When I reduce that number, let's say from 50 to 30, it will hide particle layer 50 to 30, which are the last particles that are born, meaning the animation will get shorter. If I increase the number to 60, it will take longer until all particles are born, except I decrease the emitter particles birth delay to, let's say, 0.03. So it's always a balance of different settings to get a result you think works. Let's move on. The particle's lifespan determines how long after birth the particles are visible. Particles fade in, fade out, and scale up, scale down determine how the particles appear and disappear, either by fading in and out or by scaling up from 0 or down to 0, or both. Change the particle shape here in the drop-down menu. Set the particle size and the size randomness. If you want all particles to have the exact same size, set it to 0. Adjust the particle's color and the color randomness, the overall opacity of the particles, and the opacity randomness. Then you can adjust the overall rotation of the shape and the rotation randomness, of course. Next, you can change the flicker amount, which is how much the current opacity value decreases or increases. And the flicker speed determines how often that happens per second. Then you can determine the overall speed of the particles, how fast they move, and you can add randomness to it. So each particle moves at a slightly different speed. The X, Y, and Z position wiggle amount determine the max distance a particle is allowed to randomly move from its birth position. Then you can adjust the rotation speed of all particles and the maximum amount they can randomly rotate in the X, Y, and Z direction. Every particle has a random seed number assigned, meaning every time you play back the animation, it behaves exactly the same, which is important. You can offset that random seed number of all particles here with the overall random seed offset. Let's increase it by 1. That means the overall behavior stays the same, but the defined random animation pattern for each particle changes. You can quickly create new random animation versions and see what looks best. And finally, you can add an overall directional force to the particles. I call it wind, to make them drift in a certain direction. The x direction wind speed is set to 50, which makes the particles drift slowly from left to right. Let's add a negative y direction wind, and they move upwards. Let's take a look at the particles comp. You can see that each layer is a particle. It has the different shape options and lots of expressions that determine its behavior. Everything is open, you can take a look at it. Let's go back into the main comp. The user interface recognizes the PS particle trail comp and shows the current settings. As I mentioned before, it synchronizes every 3 seconds, so it might take a quick moment. Once your particle animation is final, you can turn it into a keyframe animation with the bake button up here. All shape layers remain 3D layers. The animation will be exactly the same added to your comp. Let's take a look into the baked comp. It's all keyframes and the expressions are deactivated. Exactly the same, but playback is much faster. You can also bake it into a 2D simulation of the 3D movements. This is not 100% accurate, but it is very close. The set position and the 3D rotation are simulated by adjusting the particle scale and ratio. This is convenient because you can import 2D shape layers into Lottie Creator, for example. Internally, it creates 3D layers first, then reduces them to 2D layers. You can see these calculations happening when particles are jumping around. Alright, I think I covered a lot. I can't wait to see your animations.